All right, guys, so we're talking about how to build a max effort upper body training session today. I will say that in the coming videos, we'll talk about how to build a max effort lower. We'll talk about dynamic effort. We'll talk about conditioning sessions. But for today, we're going to focus more on the max effort session for the upper body. Now, there's a lot of nuances to this and a lot of different ways that you could go. And I think usually what happens with conjugate is that people get paralysis by analysis. There's so many variations. What variations correlate with my client's weaknesses or even your own weaknesses? How often do I test them? What assistance exercises do I use? Do I use a secondary lift? A lot of questions that I hear and a lot of things that I see happening which put people in a position to really do themselves a disservice. They end up getting too much analysis and overthinking what they should be putting on paper. And that puts them in a position where the longevity's not there and they're not making consistent progress. So I want to really make this really as clean cut as I can and give you some objectives to think about, some things that really are going to be a vital part to writing these sessions as efficiently as you can. Now, today we're talking about max effort. What does that mean? It's a singular effort. It's not multiple rep max. Remember that anytime we go beyond a 1 RM, that classifies as sub-maximal work. It's still a vital method. It's still one that we use regularly, and it's still a method that we use to replace max effort on a very consistent basis. But when we are referring to max effort, we are talking about a 1 rep max, okay? So just wanted to put that out there for today. Second thing is that you can use maximal effort and sub-maximal effort in the same session. That presents another challenge, or another question rather, that people tend to have about, do you use a secondary lift? Secondary lift usually comes by way of a bilateral movement, and it's used to bring up volume because max effort we know is not super high volume. It's not supposed to be. But you can use a secondary lift. But I will tell you that I have experimented extensively with using secondary lifts for longer periods of time, and the results were never favorable, only because it tends to beat you up. It is going to be more demanding on the nervous system. It's going to eventually put you in a position where there can be some compensation that takes place. So while I like using a secondary lift, I don't do it all the time. It might happen every third or fourth week. Okay, so say I run 2 weeks of the same assistance exercises, typically what we do, and then on that third week I might use a secondary lift for 2 weeks, and then we go back to using more of our special exercises to assist whatever we're training on a given day. So hopefully that helps clear that up. I personally wouldn't advocate using a secondary lift all the time, but it's definitely something you can do from time to time and have it work pretty well. So for this session today, I'm just going to give you some pretty straightforward examples. And again, this isn't something that I've thought out or scripted beforehand. I'm just doing this organically. And you know, some things that we should think about is, what is our max effort variation? Pin press, great variation. We could go down the list of reasons why this will correlate and show limitations in the majority of people. You can customize this, of course, to the person, but I'm going to want to give you some examples of things that we've seen to be tried and true. Pin press is one of them. Now you can do this from various heights. You can use various barbells, typically 4 to 6 inches above chest, or 6 to 8. So either a mid press point, usually a sticking point for people is about 4 to 6 inches above the chest. And then you have some other people that have more triceps deficiency that miss the lockout. Again, case-by-case basis, you can tailor that to the person. These are typically the two that I use, and even sometimes we'll use a really high pin press to really work on targeting the triceps. That's another case altogether. So here you could have really an endless amount of variations if you're thinking about using things like accommodating resistance, specialty bars. Again, this is probably where people get into trouble, because this turns into 100 different variations. Instead, what I want you to think about for your client or for yourself, the variations that correlate with their sticking points. Okay, so if you have someone that gets stuck off their chest, that's going to be different than someone that gets stuck at lockout. You can throw in accommodating resistance with that, but what you need to do really is start thinking about variations for each person that correlate with their weaknesses. And again, it does take more of a trained eye. You're coaching your client, you see where they're getting stuck. That's going to allow you to really dial in terms of being a great coach to zero in on those things. And that's something, again, I don't want you to get stuck on, because the paralysis by analysis is very easy to happen before we even get out of the starting gate. We're only on the first movement today, and there's like a million different things that we could possibly do. So think about variations that are reliable in terms of data. Pinpress, Anderson squats. I love pin variations because we're starting from a disadvantage, and there's a number of benefits for that as well in terms of building absolute strength. But this is a good, valid variation. And then you obviously have your variations that we know to be true, like a floor press. Using various types of specialty bars for a bench press, using band tension, using heavy chains. Again, a lot of different things that we can use to our advantage. The question we always get to is, how often do I test these? 12 to 16 weeks is usually a good amount of time where you can see if you're making progress, and you can see if your programming is playing out the way you would like it to. So, second thing, we talked about a secondary lift. And this is something, again, I wouldn't recommend doing all the time. I know people that do it all the time. I'm not one of them, and I don't have my clients do it all the time because the risk versus reward for me isn't there. Is it more fun to do? 100%. I love doing a secondary lift. You get a great pump. It feels psychologically like you are doing more, and that's really kind of the thing that we have to be mindful of, is that the psychology is a very much important piece to programming. So while this psychologically is great, long term, I don't think it's the best way to go. But to give people, throw people a bone rather, we can put this in on a systematic basis and have it work very well. Okay, so in this case, we're going to go with a football bar, bench, and basically, I don't typically tell people to get a rep max for this. Usually, I'll tell them to build to a heavy 5 in 5 sets. And this would be 5 sets building. These would be our work sets, but for here, we're going to build across all 5 sets. So something like that, so they're not focused, I got to get a 5 RM. I want them just to build to a heavy set, accumulate some volume. Pretty simple. All right, now we get into our assistance work. Typically on a max effort or dynamic effort day, I'm going to program some type of superset here to keep things efficient. It's a very easy way to do push-pull type work, and more than likely, we're going to do some direct triceps work. So let's just say roll back triceps. And then let's just say we're doing a T-bar row and 4 times 10 to 12, 4 times 10 to 12. Pretty straightforward, okay? All right, and then from here, we can go a few different ways, but more than likely, we'll probably do some direct biceps work. You're probably thinking, chin-up's a big movement. Do I want to put that at the end of the session? Perfectly okay to do that, okay? We're going to do a close grip chin-up. It's going to really accentuate the biceps, and it's going to give us a great balance between what we've already done. Believe it or not, doing our horizontal rows before vertical pulls, I tend to actually favor this more because I get a lot more activation of the upper back prior to hitting this. So this is one way that I've done it, and of course, if I wanted to, I could put this at the beginning, but just to show you that you can start thinking about things maybe a little bit differently. It doesn't always have to be a set way like the textbook says. And then more than likely, we'll end with some band work for the triceps. And this is going to be super high volume, usually something like 3 sets of 50, banded push down, something of that nature. And that's really it for the day. Very straightforward, okay? So how would this look if we changed it to no secondary lift? Go with just a heavy dumbbell floor press. And I would usually vary the grip. All right, so if we had a straight bar here, I'd probably go with a neutral grip here. And this would usually be something like 5 sets of 10. Again, relatively heavy, about 90 seconds rest between sets. And then if we wanted to, we could do our chin up here. And then we could have some assistance work here. Maybe it's push downs, and face pull. And then we could end with some additional work, maybe some banded back work. So again, very high volume. Again, you're only limited by your imagination. That's one thing that's great with conjugate, is that you can do it a number of ways and have it play out effectively. But my last point is that don't get paralysis by analysis coming out of the gate. And this is usually where people get stuck. And then they start thinking about, do I do a secondary lift? And then that's kind of where people get stuck and hit the wall. So your variations, remember, I think that everyone should have variations unique to them. We used to have a ton of variations, and we've kind of whittled that list down to be less dense. So now I know that instead of thinking about new things all the time, I can use things that I know to be true. Now, it's not to say that we're not using and testing new variations. We certainly are. All right. I love testing new variations. That's part of the process. But over, really a long period of time, we keep coming back to what we know to be true. And these are things like pin presses, Anderson squats, box squat variations. And that kind of always keeps coming back up. Now, instead of thinking about new ways, brand new ways to test max effort variations, we could just think about new ways to vary the variations that we already know are very reliable, like a pin press. Okay, so that's as far as I'm going to go with this for this session. Hopefully this is helping. We will talk about other sessions. Like I said, max effort lower, some of the same similarities are there. On lower body days, I almost never use supersets just because it is more demanding on the muscular system, and usually people need more recovery between some of the work that we're doing on those days. And there are a number of different things that we need to think about with those sessions as well. Now, my last point, I already said this is my last point, but this is really my last point now, is that when you write your upper body sessions, we get questions from bodybuilders. Can this be more body part split emphasis? Yes, it definitely can. Your max effort upper session can be more of a chest and back emphasis, whereas your dynamic effort upper can be more of a shoulder and triceps emphasis. You can do that. It's not sacrilegious to do that. And in fact, I do that all the time myself because it allows for built-in recovery in the week. And if you're doing high volume with your assistant's work, you might need 7 days to recover, okay? Especially if you're older. So those are some other things to think about. And again, we're gonna keep building on this stuff and hopefully, making this stuff easier for you guys so you can write better training sessions.